Shana Tova. Good Yontif. When my parents and I moved here to Atlanta in 1999, most of our family lived between Richmond and Baltimore or between Tampa and Boca. You too. We knew a handful of people, but I quickly learned that Atlanta was a city full of people like me, transplants from another part of the country. When we joined Temple Emanu-El later that year, we were welcomed into the congregation, and the congregation paired us with another family, the Silvermans. I didn't know it then, but we had become a chavurah of sorts. For those unfamiliar, a chavurah is a group of Jews who become something like a chosen family. The chavurah gets together for holidays, milestones, and supports one another in times of trouble. For many years, my best memories of Rosh Hashanah dinner, Yom Kippur breakfast, and Pesach Seder all took place at the home of Bernie and Faye Silverman. Hi, Bernie. This was a shidduch, a match that has lasted to this day. Most recently, when my parents went on the Temple Emanu-El trip last year to Israel with Lori and Aaron Silverman, over 20 years since we first met. And just a few weeks ago, I officiated, along with Rabbi Rachel, at one of their sons' weddings. Thanks to our family's connection with the Silvermans, I feel like I have deep roots, relationships, and pride in being a Jew from Atlanta. Nowadays, Atlanta is my home, my forever home, and I get to be the one who welcomes transplants to the community. All of that is because of Temple Emanu-El. Since then, I've had many life experiences similar to my family's with the Silvermans. I've lived in Maryland and Israel and Ohio, and in each place, strangers went out of their way to make me feel like I belonged. Those strangers quickly became chosen family, and our connection became sacred. There's something very biblical in the act of welcoming strangers. The folks in my life who have gone out of their way to remind me of that remind me also a lot of our patriarch, Abraham. God creates a covenant with Abraham and all his descendants at the beginning of the book of Genesis. The physical symbol of that covenant is through Brit Milah, through circumcision. Immediately after his circumcision, Abraham sits at the front of his tent. God appears beside him. However, simultaneously, 3 strangers approach Abraham from the wilderness. Defying all expectation, Abraham leaps up, ignoring God's presence, and greets the 3 strangers. There's no mention of lidocaine, no mention of Tylenol here either. Abraham's actions are extraordinary on many levels. He deliberately ignores God, greets his guests despite his pain, and does all of this for 3 complete strangers. Abraham puts God second to the care of needy strangers. Only later do we learn that these strangers were angels sent by God to deliver Abraham and Sarah the news that they would conceive and have a baby boy. Without realizing it, Abraham was serving God by helping these 3 people. This is a radical scene. Abraham walks away from God to greet strangers. This is the true nature of being Jewish, then and now. The very point of our lives, our being, is to help connect with others. This is our sacred mission as Jews. We can find the same idea in our Siddur when we say Shema. Every Jew knows Shema. We are born hearing these words, and for many, they are the last words we will utter. They are the words we can hear and say before we go to bed at night and when we wake up in the morning. Let's try this together. Say it with me. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, Israel. Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. We say these words so often, we might not notice how that phrase starts. Hear, Israel. The Shema is addressed to one another. Yes, these words affirm our belief in one God, but we don't need to tell God that. We're talking to each other. When we say Yisrael in Shema, we're not talking about the land or the state. We're talking about the people of Israel, the descendants of our patriarch Jacob, focusing on all of Israel, all the Jewish people, is an essential pattern in Judaism. We put God second in our prayers to connecting with one another. It's right there in the words of the Shema. The idea of putting God second comes from Rabbi Daniel Hartman. Rabbi Hartman expands on this idea that when Jews put God ahead of human beings, we ignore those who need us the most. Family, friends, neighbors, or strangers within our midst. Instead, Rabbi Hartman believes that Judaism is best practiced when we prioritize the connection with our fellow human beings first, and then God. The obligation to put our fellow human beings ahead of God is especially present on Yom Kippur. Tomorrow we'll read a passage from the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah looks around in his day and sees people who pretend to be devout. Meanwhile, these same pious souls ignore the hungry, the naked, oppress their workers, and expect God to answer their prayers nonetheless. Isaiah has had enough and tells God, "Cry with a full throat without restraint. Kira v'garon al tachshoch. Raise your voice like a ram's horn. Kashofar harem kolecha. Declare to my people their transgression," Isaiah says, "to the house of Jacob their sin. They seek you daily, eager to learn your ways, like a nation that does what is right, a nation that has not abandoned the laws of its God. They are eager for the nearness of God," but Isaiah sees right through the facade of their false piety. And Isaiah spares nothing. He mocks how the Israelites moan and complain to God. He says, mocking them, "Why, when we fasted, did you not see? When we starved our bodies, did you not pay attention?" Isaiah is ruthless. Here comes the hammer. When Isaiah lays out the truth, Isaiah tells them that God doesn't hear them, and this is why. Because on your fast day, you go about your business as normal, and you force your laborers to work as well. Your fasting today is not meant to make your voice heard on high. Is that the fast that God desires? A day for people to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast? A day when God is favorable to your requests? No. This is the fast that God desires, Isaiah says. To free us from the wicked fetters, untie the cords of the yoke, let the oppressed go free, break off every chain, share your bread with the hungry, and take the poor into your home. When you see the naked, clothe them, and do not ignore your own kin. Only then shall your light burst forth like the dawn. Our mission is clear. Don't bother fasting. Don't bother continuing your prayers tonight or going into tomorrow on Yom Kippur if you're going to ignore the hungry, the homeless, or the naked. If Isaiah's words are the stick by which we should measure our service to God, we should examine how we're doing as a synagogue. The Temple Emanu-El website, a place I know you all visit frequently, has a page listing our mission and core values, as you know. When I read these, I noticed that God is not mentioned anywhere. Instead, we prioritize helping one another in a complex world, raising a generation of Jews who feel empowered to be Jewish, and most importantly, taking our world from where it is to where it needs to be. The purpose of our temple is to bring people together, to connect us on a deep and meaningful level. But temple doesn't accurately describe who we are. Today, we use names like temple to describe a place like Emanu-El, but the word temple certainly evokes a connection with God. However, for thousands of years, we used two words, one Hebrew and one Greek, synagogue and Beit Knesset. These words, synagogue and Beit Knesset, mean the same thing, and it is not temple. Instead, a synagogue and a Beit Knesset both mean gathering house. At our core, our Beit HaKnesset is not primarily a house of prayer, ironic as it is to say on this night. For most, a synagogue's primary purpose is for Jews and for Jewish families to connect with one another. Temple Emanu-El has long fulfilled its purpose as a Beit Knesset, a gathering house for my family. When we were matched with the Silverman family, Emanu-El became the hub in my family's network. My closest friends are members here. The people in my chavurah are members here. And I want that feeling for every family at Temple Emanu-El. On a small scale, I see this occur spontaneously every Friday night. Whether a new member or someone shul shopping or someone just considering Judaism comes to services, I know that a group of congregants has a keen eye for welcoming those strangers. I won't use the names of the welcomers because they definitely do not do it for the notoriety. They know who they are, and they're likely blushing right now anyways. If you were ever one of those lost souls walking into a Friday night service, you likely met them too. These unique folks act like modern-day Abrahams and Isaiahs. They go out of their way to greet a guest, like Abraham. Like Isaiah, they know true devotion to God is caring for our fellow human beings. I'm convinced that the true sacred feeling we have on a Friday night comes from those connections that we make from and with one another. In the year ahead, 5784, you'll hear a lot more on how we can pursue this prophetic mission together, to share our bread with the hungry, care for the poor, shelter the homeless, and clothe the naked, so that, as Isaiah said, our light will burst forth like the dawn, and healing will spring up. Shema Yisrael, listen up, all of Israel, and then we will realize that we are one, just like God is one.